So, how do we make legislation more readable? One of the issues that's being discussed in legislative drafting today is how to make legislation, quote unquote, more readable, meaning how to make the text of legislative measures, easier to understand, particularly by those who are subject to that law or those who have to administer or interpret or enforce the law. In Athabasca University in Alberta, Canada, they have a graduate diploma in legislative drafting program. And students in that program are provided a number of suggestions to hopefully make legislation more readable. Some of those suggestions include providing an overview of the forthcoming statutory scheme, to follow standard writing practices, to use standardized, plain and simple language, even to use formulas or diagrams or other modes of communicating information to make it more digestible and more readable. So in terms of providing an overview, some drafters argue that it's easier for readers of bills to understand the relationship between or among different statutory provisions and the detailed requirements of maybe a series of rules if the readers of that statutory scheme have basically a mental framework for what they're about to read. Now, how can you do this? One way is to contain a purpose clause or even headings or section notes for all of the code sections so that these could act as providing an overview or a map to the reader. Now, while legislation generally doesn't explicitly state the principles that serve as the basis for the particular statute or set of statutes, some laws do contain like a preamble or some detailed titles which might provide guidance to the reader. Purpose clauses, sometimes we call them here in California statements of legislative intent or legislative findings and declarations. They're used to state the purpose for which the legislation is being enacted. And these clauses may provide an introduction to the statutory language that will come thereafter. Headings, code section notes, those are also sometimes used by legislative drafters in an effort to provide a single word or perhaps a short title to a forthcoming section or area of the law. And of course, these types of headings can assist a reader in finding relevant provisions that they might want to jump to or go back and forth. Maybe they don't have to read the entire text of a statute, especially if it's lengthy, because they can easily find the relevant provision or sections. So legislative drafters can use several standard writing guidelines to present the text of legislation. Some of the main guidance, of course, that's pretty consistent amongst jurisdictions is to use the present tense of verbs, use the active rather than the passive voice. All these types of things help contribute to a better understanding of the text of a statute. And drafters also try to avoid the use of provisos or creating too many exceptions or qualifications to a general rule of law. I think the other important guideline for making legislation more readable is standardized language that the general public generally sees, language that's in common use. We should avoid in drafting statutes old words, Latin terms, forms of legalese. We really ought to follow modern drafting standards and principles to assist readers in their review of legislative measures.